Good afternoon. I'm going to do a sound check really quick. Cassidy, can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And Cassidy's monitoring the chat function just to see if there's questions or challenges that arise during the webinar. But I'll go ahead and begin. So today our webinar is Hospital District Expansion and Related Issues. And we have the pleasure of learning from Trent Krenke today. Trent is board certified in health law, and he advises hospitals, physicians, nursing facilities, and other healthcare providers in connection with compliance matters, regulatory and operational issues, as well as business transactions. Trent represents clients in a wide range of healthcare transactional matters, such as the purchase and sale of facilities, structuring joint ventures, and other arrangements to comply with state and federal statutes and regulations. So Trent, thank you so much. I look forward to learning about this today.
Right. Thank you, and thank you to Ted and East Memorial Hospital for hosting, and thank you to Texas A&M University and the A&M Rural and Community Health Institute for having me. We're going to start off by talking about hospital district expansion in Texas, and then we'll talk about sales tax for hospital districts and how that could affect tax rates, the effective tax rate and the rollback rate. And then also happy to answer any questions you may have about any of this. When you talk about hospital districts in Texas, unfortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all legal issue. Each district can have its own individual enabling legislation, so you have to look to that source to see what a hospital district can and can't do, and that includes whether a hospital district can expand. Originally, all hospital districts, or the large majority of hospital districts, were created by special enabling legislation. So when they wanted to create a district, let's take Eastland for example, they drafted the statute went through the legislative process, was passed, and there was a statute for Eastland Memorial Hospital District. Same for Titus County Hospital District, South Limestone Hospital District, and many other hospital districts. A few years ago, because these statutes were all kept all over the place, they codified the statutes and put them in what they now call the Texas Special District Local Laws Code. So if you want to find a statute for a hospital district, including for Eastland, for example, you open up the Special District Local Laws Code. Eastland's is under Chapter 1023, and you can easily find it there. For hospital districts that have been created more recently, there's a catch-all statute. It's Chapter 286 of the Health and Safety Code. And so rather than having individual enabling legislation, most recent hospital districts have been created under Chapter 286 of the Health and Safety Code. Some of the large urban districts like Dallas and San Antonio, their governing statute is Chapter 281. There's also Chapter 282 and 283 districts, but those are very few and far between. So when you're talking to someone about what a hospital district can and can't do, oftentimes they'll see something in 281 or 282, 283, 286, and they'll think it applies to their hospital district, but that's not always the case. You got to go to the original statute that created the hospital district and start there. So if you're considering expanding the district boundaries, the first thing you have to do, Eastland, for example, is look up 1023, or if it was another district, go to that source. So once you find the source, you have to see if the source has a provision that allows the district to expand its boundaries. In using Eastland as an example, originally there was no provision for Eastland to expand its boundaries. As such, if it's not in the statute, generally you can't do it. So if it's not in the statute, you have to go get the statute amended and get that expressly written in the statute. So back in, I think it was 2013, for example, Eastland went through the legislative process, had their statute, their enabling legislation amended. So now it expressly has a provision, it's 1023.401, that governs expansion of the district territory. So if your statute doesn't have it in there, that's going to be the first step if you want to expand. Eastland's, their enabling legislation, when they got that amendment made, it references the process in Chapter 286. So it's kind of a bit of a puzzle. Typically, 286 would not apply to Eastland, but in this limited situation, Chapter 286 of the Health and Safety Code does apply as it relates to expansion. And so that's probably the easiest approach if you need to get your enabling legislation amended, to simply reference Chapter 286, because the process is already outlined in that chapter. So this is an election timetable if you wanted to expand your district. Now, these dates are estimates. Each or twice a year, the Texas Secretary of State office puts up an election calendar. So the May 2020 election calendar is already up. I use that and made some educated guesses on timelines for the November election date. But just keep in mind that these dates are subject to change. And once that calendar is posted on the Secretary of State's website, here in the coming months, you'll have definitive dates. But this outlines the process. Now, most districts can have a special election anytime they want to, subject to the election code. So if you wanted to create a district or expand district boundaries, you could have the election maybe in April, October. It doesn't always have to be on the uniform election date. However, in Eastland, for example, the statute specifically says the board shall hold an election under this section on the first uniform election date that allows the board sufficient time to comply with the applicable requirements of law. So in Eastland, and it could be in Titus or South Limestone as well, the election has to be held in May or November. There's pros and cons with that. The likely result, especially this year, as you all know, November 3rd, if the election, let's say, for example, was held on November 3rd, 2020, same day as the presidential election, so voter turnout will probably be at an all-time high, whereas if you had held it on a non-uniform election date, voter turnout would likely be much, much lower. So how do you expand the hospital district once you get your hands on the statute? I'm going to use the process in 286 that would apply to 286 districts, and also any special district like Eastland whose enabling legislation references 286. So the first step is there has to be a petition, and the petition has to come from voters outside the district but within the territory that the hospital district wants to expand to. So they're not going to be hospital district residents, but residents in the area to be annexed. That petition is filled out, and I have some information later on as to what needs to go into that petition. But it's filled out, at least 50 people. I'm going to suggest you have much more than 50 sign it, because some of them won't be registered voters. They'll leave off certain information, and you want to have some cushion there if the idea is to expand the district. But it has to be at least 50 voters registered in the area, and they file that petition with the secretary of the hospital district that they want to be included in. Some guidelines for a petition. Again, this is a petition. These guidelines would apply to any petition: expanding the hospital district, dissolving the hospital district, application for a new sales tax in the hospital district. These are just general petition pointers. So it has to be registered voters. They have to reside in the boundaries of the to be annexed area. And so you want to make sure their driver's license and voter registration matches up with the address they put down. If they're just temporarily living in that area, that's not a valid signature. The petition must have certain items, including a signature, a printed name, the date of the signature, the residence address, including the city. Sometimes, for whatever reason, they'll just write their street address and leave the city off. That's not a valid signature. And either their date of birth or voter registration and county of registration. PO boxes are not acceptable. So oftentimes we're asked to review petitions, and so we have to go through line by line and see if it has, you know, these 5 or 6 requirements. And if it doesn't, it's not a valid signature, and it doesn't count towards the 50. You can't register other people. Seems simple enough, but oftentimes people will sign up their spouse or significant other. Can't do that. Everyone must sign individually. So the first thing you have to do when you get that petition is go through, make sure you have 50 valid signatures. If you have a valid petition, the board then sets a hearing to discuss the petition. That hearing must be more than 30 days after the board issues the order. And the order is the order to hear the petition. So you set up the hearing. That has to comply with the Texas Open Meetings Act, just like any other budget hearing or tax hearing that the board may have. And if the board finds that the annexation would be feasible and benefit the district, the board may approve the annexation by resolution. So in other words, if the board gets the petition, a hospital district board doesn't have to approve the petition. It's up to the board in its judgment to make the decision whether or not to hold the election to annex the new territory. Now here, I gotta say, I was telling Ted earlier, it's not common to have hospital district expansion elections. To my knowledge, the only recent hospital district expansion election occurred with Frio Hospital District in Pearsall, Texas, or Frio County. They successfully added the city of Dilley and expanded their district to be contiguous with Frio County boundaries. It was not when it was originally created. So other than that, there's not a lot of other hospital districts we can look to learn from or to answer questions. Really, it's Frio County, and that's it in recent history. But the statute, the reason I say that is the statute has 2 items that have to be included on the ballot. One is adding the territory to the hospital district, the Titus County Hospital District, Eastern Memorial Hospital District. Makes sense. But the second one is interesting, and I've asked around and nobody knows the origination of this second ballot language. It says the description of the territory to be added will assume its proportionate share of the outstanding debts and taxes of the hospital district if it's added to the hospital district. So in other words, there's 2 votes. One is to be added to the district, and the other one is to assume or not assume a proportionate share of the debts of the district. It also says taxes. We don't, as you all know, hospital districts don't pay taxes. So we don't know where this language came from, why the word taxes is in there, and really its effect. We can only guess. In Frio, both measures passed, so it was real simple. We don't believe both measures have to pass for the territory to be annexed. As long as the first one passes, approving the annexation, it's up to the voters whether or not they're going to assume a proportionate share of the debts of the district. And when it says debts, it's our opinion that that's referring to debts secured by tax revenue. So debts under a general obligation bond. Because when you calculate your tax rate, there's 2 components of the effective rate, as you may know, and one of them is taxes earmarked to pay general obligation bonds or debt secured by tax revenue. My best guess is if item number 2 does not pass, there could be a situation where you have different tax rates for different parts of the district. If there are if there are general obligation bonds. If there are not general obligation bonds outstanding at the time of this election, I don't think it's applicable. Step 5, the elections are ordered and notice of the elections must be given. I say elections, plural, because remember you have 2 ballot measures. So you have to order the election, elections plural because you're going to have two different elections. One within Eastland County Hospital District, or sorry, Eastland Memorial Hospital District, or whichever hospital district wants to expand the territory, and a separate election in the area to be annexed. And both areas have to pass the election in order for it to be successful. If one area does not pass the election is not successful. So you're going to issue two orders and two notices, one within within the hospital district and one in the area to be annexed. Now, Chapter 286 says the election is to be held between 45 days and 60 days after the election is ordered. However, the election code trumps that. There are blackout periods. You can't have elections too close to a uniform election date or a primary election date. Also, in the case of Eastland, the statute specifically says it must be held on a uniform election date. So oftentimes, not just with expanding a district, but other hospital district elections, the code may say one thing, but you have to have the election within 45 to 60 days, but the election code will often trump that. And so it's the election code that you got to look at to see when the appropriate time is to hold the election. So in Eastland's case, for example, I had the timeline up there earlier. That's the timeline you have to follow. The election would not be held necessarily within 45 and 60 days because there's a more detailed provision that says it has to be held on a uniform election date. I often contact the Secretary of State Elections Division if I have any very specific detailed elections questions that I can't answer or that I can't find the answer to. They have a great staff and can be a great resource for any elections, board elections, expansion elections, or new hospital district elections. And again, the last step is the annexation of the territory is final if it's approved by both areas, the existing district and the to be annexed area. I know that's a lot of information. I'll stop there to see if we have any questions on that process to expand district boundaries.
Cassidy, has anything come through chat so far for questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. Do we need to open up mics to see if there's questions, or are we just using chat? I guess I should have asked that at the beginning.
I can open some mics if you like.
Just take a breather, see if there's any questions.
Okay, the lines are open, so if anyone has a question, you are unmuted.
Mr. Krinke, you said you need to get a lot more signatures than the 50. Do you have enough experience to say we frequently throw out 20% or 50%? Do I need twice as many signatures in order to be sure? Or do you have an estimate of what percentage of those are not complete and accurate?
I think if you have those guidelines ahead of time and make a concerted effort to follow them, probably only 10% get thrown out. But what we see a lot of times is when members of the community without a healthcare or legal background try to do their own petition, it can be almost 100% sometimes because they'll leave a column off of a required item. So, but the more the better. I also think it shows community support. If you have a petition with 50 people, that's nice. If you have a petition with 100 or 500 people that are on board with expanding the hospital district, that looks even better.
So Trent, I could see the annex area being a variable, whether they want to vote themselves into a tax district or not. But the existing district, that's kind of a surprise. So they have to agree on whether to expand the district.
Yeah.
I don't see why they would not agree to that.
I would tend to agree. I don't think that's where the concern typically is. It would bring in presumably additional tax revenue. I'm trying to think of some downsides. I guess you'd have more individuals eligible to serve on the board.
Yeah.
That is brings me to a related point. you have to go back and look at your statute to see how the board is structured. And it may require amending the statute to include the to be annexed area to serve on the board. In Eastland, for example, I believe all your spots are at large. And so if the district expands, those residents of the new areas can just apply for an at-large position. You don't have to amend your enabling legislation to give them an opportunity to serve on the board. But in other cases where positions are by precinct, that precinct may not be specific, the new precincts may not be specifically listed in the enabling legislation. So if you want to give the new residents an opportunity to serve on the board, you have to amend your legislation to include those precincts which don't currently have spots on the board, or to go at large, however you want to do that. In your case, fortunately, it's very simple. If the election was in November, your election's in May. So when the following May, let's say May 2021, for example, those new residents can apply to run or serve on the board.
Okay.
So I guess that could be a downside. You know, you have more people, perhaps, depending on, or upside. It's often hard to find qualified individuals that want to serve on boards, but you have more competition for those same 7 or 9 spots. The district's indigent care obligations are going to expand to not only indigent patients under the current district, but to indigent patients and residents in the greater expanded district. But I can't think of many downsides other than perhaps those, depending on how you view them, for the residents of the existing district.
Trent, I have a question. If you have an affirmative vote of both the taxpayers within the district and outside the district, and the district is expanding, assets of the hospital then become proportionately owned by all of the, the old plus the new taxpayers within that expanded district?
Yes, sir. And so the district this is going to remain the same legal entity. So the tax ID of the district is going to remain the same. The assets are not going to transfer legally to those residents, but those residents, you know, would have depending on how you look at it, a pro rata ownership of all hospital district assets. Similar to when a municipality annexes a subdivision, for example. You know, those residents are now city residents, and so they're entitled to all the benefits that the city or municipality provides. One other thing I was going to say, some lessons learned from Frio is what they did. There was a town called Dilley within the county, but outside their boundaries. The hospital in Dilley had closed several years before the election, the expansion election. And so those residents wanted a new clinic in Dilley. And so the hospital district had an architect they found a site, drafted plans for a very nice clinic, and said, hey, if you expand the district, we'll build this new clinic in town. And that was sort of the carrot that they dangled in front of the citizens of Dilley to approve the expansion of the district.
Trent, and that's kind of what my question was. How much, I mean, shouldn't you do some prep before you go ask these voters, get some education out there? I mean, are there people that do that that you can hire? Or, I mean, wouldn't you recommend that to kind of be a better educated voter?
Yes, sir, absolutely. I think before you proceed with the petition, you got to get all your ducks in a row. The hospital district, any hospital district can legally educate voters on a measure, but it can't advocate for a position one way or the other. You probably have seen this maybe with school bonds. You know, the district can put out information to educate voters, but if you want to advocate for a position one way or the other, you have to create a political action committee. So in Frio, for example, or other new hospital district elections, citizens have created a political action committee to campaign for or against the position. Some lessons learned from new hospital district elections where you had hospital authorities that wanted to create a district. They took a similar approach. We've seen some pass and some fail. The ones that passed and were successful in creating a new district attended the Rotary meetings, Commissioners Court meetings, had both city council, the city council and the Commissioners Court on board. Lions Club, any organization, Chamber of Commerce, any organization out there, they attended those meetings, held open houses, at a board member's house to answer questions. A lot of campaigning from outside of the hospital district in this case, but a lot of education before they took the next step to
How to convince them to be taxed for something that they're getting free anyway, that would take some work, I would think, because they know they're going to use it if they need it anyway. Why'd I need to pay taxes?
Exactly.
So,
Yes, sir. I think one argument is if they want to, as everyone knows, rural hospitals are struggling, and there's this MFAR regulation. Now, although the hospitals is in a strong position today, that may not be the case in several years. And so if they want to keep their hospital, everyone has to pitch in. I shared with Ted the contact information of some individuals in Frio County, and also individuals at Goodall Witcher Hospital, Bosque County outside of Waco. They created a new hospital district about a year ago. So Ted can, you mentioned some names. There's probably more out there, but those would be who I would start with. I think they have they have great resources too. PowerPoint presentations, flyers, things that they've already created that may give political action committee or the hospital district some ideas.
Are those contacts we could share with the other people on the webinar afterwards?
Absolutely.
All
yes.
right, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to hospital district sales and use tax. So again, kind of to go back to how we started, there are two ways generally a hospital district can have a sales and use tax. Under 286 of the Health and Safety Code, if a hospital district was created under 286, no one listening to this presentation was under 286, so I'll just skip ahead, or 285 of the Health and Safety Code. So chapter 285 is a general catch-all statute for hospital districts. It applies generally, depending on, sometimes it's limited to small hospital districts or large hospital districts, depending on the statute. But it's a catch-all provision for hospital districts. And there's a specific provision in there that permits a hospital district to impose a sales and use tax. Of course, 285, kind of put the puzzle together, references 321-102 of the tax code, which governs how municipalities have a sales and use tax. So it's, you have to go to your enabling legislation. If it's not in there, look at 285. 285 in this instance covers sales and use taxes, which is how you have a sales and use tax, which then kicks you over to chapter 321-102 of the municipal tax code. This is a slide that shows which hospital districts in Texas have a sales and use tax. There may be one or two other ones, but I pulled this from the comptroller's website a couple weeks ago, but you can see, and then this is the tax rate, 5 cents to 7.5 to 10, 2.5 with 10 being the most. So I don't know how many hospital districts there are in Texas. There are many, but you only have 7 or so that have a sales and use tax. I don't know about Baylor County Hospital District, but Dr. Dickey was telling me Nacogdoches County Hospital District, they only get the sales and use tax. They don't have an ad valorem tax. So just something that may be a reason why they have the higher tax rate. So this process, so one question that has come up is, one, how do we get a sales and use tax? If you don't already have one, you would look to chapter 321, 102 of the tax code. It governs how to create a sales and use tax if you don't already have one. The trick, though, is in most areas, the maximum non-state sales tax is 2 cents. And so if you're in a jurisdiction that is already at the 2 cent cap, and most municipalities either have a 2 cent tax rate, or with other jurisdictions or governmental entities are at the 2 cent tax rate, you're going to be out of luck. You can't exceed that 2 cent tax rate. But if not, then there's an option under this section of the tax code via 285 to create a sales and use tax. Then, because municipalities often expand, there's also provision in 321 that addresses what happens when a hospital district expands. And I gotta say, I don't know if this has ever happened. You know, we had the list of 7 or so hospital districts that have a sales and use tax. I'm not aware of any of them recently expanding their boundaries. So this is kind of a new area of the law, and the hospital district may have to work with the comptroller's office in these municipalities and towns within Eastland County if the election is successful to explain, okay, this is exactly how this works. My guess is they're not going to be familiar with the process, but it's very generally identical to how a municipality would expand and deal with their sales tax rate. So generally speaking, the hospital district is going to displace the sales tax from the other municipalities. So I think it's on the next slide. You can go forward thing. So again, from the comptroller's website, I'm just using Eastland as an example. These are the tax rates I could find for the other cities within Eastland County. As you can see, Rising Star, along with the Municipal Development District, is at 2 cents. Ranger, Gorman, almost all of them. Eastland is, even with the hospital district's tax rate, is at 2 cents. Carbon may be the only one that's not at the cap. But for all these districts that are at the 2 cents, the hospital district's tax rate is effectively going to reduce their tax rate to 15 cents or 1.5 cents or less if the district expands. So it sounds like bad news at first. Can you go back to the previous slide, Sam? Thank you. But when they pay the money to when those sales tax receipts are paid to the comptroller's office, although technically the hospital district has a sales tax within those municipalities, the comptroller's office reconciles that, takes the hospital district's tax in those municipalities and pays them to the municipalities. So the net result is the municipalities don't lose any tax revenue, and the hospital district doesn't get any additional tax revenue within those areas that are already at the 2 cent cap. And so I don't know why it's drafted that way. Someone a lot smarter than me probably came up with this reconciliation process. And I'm going to walk through it in a little bit more detail on some other slides. But at the end of the day, the hospital district gets to keep its existing sales tax within the areas that are not at the 2 cent cap. It would get to impose one on any expanded territory that's not at the 2 cent cap. Although from the next slide, it looks like it's pretty limited in where that may take place. And then areas that are already at the 2 cent cap, it's imposed but never received. And the comptroller reconciles all of that. I'm going to walk through the process is specifically outlined in 321-102 of the tax code. Again, this is the process for municipalities that expand their districts. And so but 285 references 321. Well, I really just took the word municipality and changed it to hospital district. So the first thing you do is send the comptroller a certified copy of the ordinance showing that the hospital district territory has been changed. So you notify the comptroller of the boundary change. You have to send a map as well, and then the tax takes effect in the new territory on the first day of the first calendar quarter after the comptroller receives the ordinance and the map. So the following quarter, the sales tax would take effect. And 321-102D has an exception that basically says the comptroller needs more time. It takes effect the following quarter. And I don't know how often that occurs or not. 102E and F, again, those, I won't read it verbatim, but that talks about the process I attempted to explain that says first, if the overlapping sales tax rate exceeds 2 cents, or sorry, the 2%, then the other entities, their rates are effectively reduced. However, under F, then the comptroller reconciles all that and ends up paying those municipalities really a share of the district's sales tax rate. So those municipalities are made whole, or any other entity. I think there was a municipal development district tax, one town. So, they would be made whole as well. So they don't lose anything by this. And so that may be a question that comes up in the city council of some of these other towns, or any town if the district is trying to expand their territory. And so it'll be important to refer them to 321-102. The good news is, as a municipality, if they've ever annexed a territory or expanded their territory, which is much more common than a hospital district, they may be familiar with the process already and may not be a huge shock to them. I know that's convoluted. Any questions about that process? I think the biggest takeaway is, at least within the city of Eastland, you get to keep, you get to keep your sales tax. And any other hospital district that in the future wants to impose a sales tax, so long as that area is not up to the 2 cent cap, those districts will get to keep their sales tax rate.
And if there's an expansion, the sales tax gets expanded into the new territory.
Yes, ma'am.
Cassidy, did anything come through chat? No. Okay.
Now, is the 2%, is that just a standard amount, or can that be increased? Is that a federal statute that it's 2%?
Yes, sir. State statute.
State statute, okay.
So I think that the state has a 6.25 sales tax rate, and then the municipalities and other districts can go up to 2% to make the effective rate no higher than 8.25. The last topic we're going to discuss is calculating the tax rate for the new territory and how this annexed property may affect the rollback rate or the effective tax rate. Last session, the legislature significantly changed how rollback rate elections and petition requirements operate across the state of Texas. You may have heard they attempted, or were successful, I believe, for counties and cities to reduce the rollback rate to 3.5%. So if a tax, and what I mean by that, if a city or county wants to increase their rate by more than 3.5%, there's an automatic rollback election. So the voters have to automatically approve that. The reason it was so contentious is it used to be 8%, and it was passed this last session. It was reduced to 3.5%, and the mayors across the state were obviously against that. Fortunately, Torch, I think, was involved in this and successful in getting hospital districts carved out of the reduced 3.5% threshold. So the threshold for hospital districts is 8%. So if the tax rate goes up more than 8%, there's a rollback election. Before this year, the bad news is before this year, if the hospital district went above that percentage, someone in the community would have to contest it. So they'd have to file a petition requesting a rollback election, which didn't happen very often. However, under the new statute, which includes hospital districts, if the hospital district goes above the rollback rate, it's an automatic rollback election. So in other words, last year, if you went above the 8%, someone would have to petition it, get signatures, kind of go through the process we discussed earlier, and contest the rollback rate. Now it's automatic, starting January 1st. So just keep that in mind. I know, and the other thing I like to add, there's not a mechanism if the district were to be expanded to circumvent this process. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's a separate election. That's a rollback issue. There's not a way to have the voters vote. I think the current rate in Eastland, for example, is 7.5 cents. So lower compared to most hospital districts across the state. But that tax rate generally is going to be the same. There's also a provision in there, because what you don't want to happen, and the statute corrects this, is you don't want to expand the territory so the appraised value goes up significantly, and so your effective rate, let's say to get the same dollar amount, let's say drops from 7.5 cents to 4 cents. You know, that doesn't make any sense. Doesn't help anyone. It defeats the purpose. Well, the statute has a provision, because this comes up with cities often, that in the first year you're gonna deduct the amount of the increased property, the annexed property, when you do those calculations. Because what you do is you compare 2019 to 2020, for example, and it's going to be way off if you don't deduct the annexed property, because taxable value within the district is going to be much greater in the current year than it was in the previous year. So it's an apples to apples calculation. In the current year, when you're conducting the effective rate, you're going to reduce that taxable value by the value of the annexed property. So you're kind of looking at the old hospital district boundaries compared to the old hospital district boundaries. Long story short, you won't be penalized by expanding the district. You won't have to reduce your tax rate by expanding the district. And there's a mechanism in place in the Truth in Taxation guidelines to address that in year one, when your appraised values are going to be significantly different if the election to annex the hospital district is successful.
So Trent, on a district, just for my understanding, so we're at 7.5%, we expand it, it's still 7.5% of that value.
Yes, sir. Net result being the hospital district would receive additional tax revenue.
Right.
That's all I have. Happy to answer any other. I have some more slides, but again, I think it covers. I don't want to get too much in the weeds. I think the hospital district and the board's very familiar with how to calculate the effective rate and the rollback rate. I use those terms today. Actually, the new statute revised both of those terms. So moving forward, there's supposed to be more taxpayer-friendly terms. The names escape me, but it's not even the effective rate and the rollback rate. It's like I can't even guess, but you'll know them when you see them. It's so that all taxpayers are very aware that there's not going to be a significant increase in the tax rate. Again, fortunately for districts, though, that 8% threshold is still in existence. That will be something to watch in the future. I don't know if the legislature is going to take another shot at that. School districts were also exempt from that reduced threshold, but certainly something to watch. I think it caught a lot of cities by surprise this last session.
I know at the last session, Torch worked hard at exempting hospitals from that 3.5% or so.
They did, and it was a last second
Yeah.
issue in the session. Everything was going, that bill was not going anywhere, and then it just gained momentum at the last minute and was a big concern.
But now that would be, should we exceed 8% with our existing district, it's automatically taken.
Automatic, that's the big change.
That's a
So
big thing now, yeah.
a lot of districts and municipalities and other governmental entities before were willing to take the risk. Rollback elections were not common, especially with like school districts. It was not uncommon for them to go above the rollback rate. But I think the concern is the citizens didn't know that they had that ability to file the petition and question the tax rate. And they wanted it to be more automatic. And so it is now this year automatic. And so with the idea being most communities probably won't approve the rollback rate if it exceeds the threshold. I think that'll be a tough election to have.
Yeah, I agree.
But if the district ever wanted to do that, I just want to close by this, if the district ever wanted to increase above the 8%, I would suggest you kind of weigh the pros and cons of doing that with a smaller district versus a larger district, because it would probably require 2 separate elections, and it's necessary to increase tax revenue by more than 8%. Maybe easier to do that with a smaller district than a larger district. Just something to.
And then expand that higher tax rate. to the-
Yes, sir.
And then annex.
And then annex afterwards.
That's a good point.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Trent. Cassidy, if you want to open up the mics and let us know if there's anything in chat